Oh my, okay.
Excellent.
Can we leave the meeting? Is that okay?
Excellent. Oh, hello, folks. I really do love, you folks can't tell, but I do love seeing all of the people coming in when you press the broadcast button. It's like letting the doors open. Hello, 33, 35, 36 attendees. Wonderful. We're going to get started in just a moment. If you're here for our event with Chaney Kwak and Daniel Handler, you are in the right place. All 58 of you. Wonderful. You love to see it. Here we are. Before we get started, I wanted to say very briefly, hello. Hi, my name is Car. I'm the events coordinator here for Green Apple Books. And if you are joining us now, you're here for our event with Chaney Kwak and Daniel Handler for Chaney's book, The Passenger. Today is the publication day for The Passenger, and this is the launch event. Woo! Congratulations, Chaney. If you're joining us, feel free to hop into the chat and let us know where you are tuning in from, all 64 of you thus far. Yay, ooh, congratulations are coming in already from all across the globe. It's very exciting. Before we start, I usually, if you've been here before, you have heard me plug upcoming events for Green Apple at this time. And instead of doing that this evening, because you can find all of that information at greenapplebooks.com, and you should find all of that information at greenapplebooks.com. Instead, I wanted to acknowledge that this is our first broadcast of two authors in store together in over a year, and it's quite exciting for us. The authors are returning to the bookstores. The earth is healing. We're really grateful to have these two here with us, and we're very grateful to you all for supporting Green Apple throughout this past year that has been, in a word, maybe you haven't heard this before, unprecedented. And we truly, genuinely appreciate your support, and we're glad to have been able to put on events throughout this entire year because of all of you. So one announcement that I will not forego is to remind you, I would be remiss in my duty if I did not remind you that you can purchase Chaney's book from greenapplebooks.com. Oh, right there, Chaney's holding it. So is Daniel. It's that handsome book right there. So The Passenger launched today. If you have not already purchased it, you can find it on our website. I will put the link in the chat for you. And if you have already purchased it, buy another one. You have friends who want to read it. I promise you that you do. I'll add the link in the chat for that, and I will also add the link for our upcoming events should you be interested. Without further ado, I would like to go ahead and introduce the authors joining us this evening. First, Daniel Handler is the author of 7 novels, including Why We Broke Up, We Are Pirates, All the Dirty Parts, and most recently, Bottle Grove. As Lemony Snicket, he's responsible for numerous books for children, including the 13-volume A Series of Unfortunate Events, the 4-volume All the Wrong Questions, and The Dark, which won the Charlotte Zolotow Award. Mr. Snicket's first book for readers of all ages, Poison for Breakfast, will be published on August 31st, 2021. I'll put the pre-order link in the chat for you as well because you're joining us and I know you're interested. Please do welcome Daniel Handler.
Woo!
And last but certainly not least, Chaney Kwak has written for publications such as the New York Times, Condé Nast Traveler, Food and Wine, Travel and Leisure, and a number of National Geographic anthologies. His fiction has appeared in Ziziba, Catamaran, Gertrude, and other literary journals, earning a special mention from the Pushcart Prize. A winner of the Key West Literary Seminar Emerging Writers Award, Kwak has received scholarships from the Breadloaf Writers Conference and was a Friends of the San Francisco Public Library Brown Handler resident. He teaches nonfiction. I was like, is that how you two know each other? He teaches nonfiction writing at the Stanford Continuing Studies program. His first book, The Passenger, How a Travel Writer Learned to Love Cruises and Other Lives from a Sinking Ship, is the reason we are here this evening. Please join me in welcoming Chaney Kwak.
Woo! Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm happy to be here. It feels like does feel like the earth is beginning to heal now that we're together in a room talking about a book rather than anything else. We are, however, in a weird I feel we need to acknowledge the strangeness of the space we're in for people who are watching. We're in a weird second floor office above Green Apple. So we're not in what anyone would think of as the Green Apple store, although I guess it's part of the empire.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the store was amazing and tried to accommodate us within the store space. Unfortunately, Comcast was being evil and just the signal wasn't strong enough. So
Oh, Comcast.
it's always Comcast.
A pox on your houses. But I'm very excited to be here to talk about this book. It is a fantastic book. I've already pushed it into several people's hands. And I think it's kind of like an irresistible book.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome. And here's how, let me know if I'm doing it wrong. But when I tell people about it, I say, so this guy, travel writer, got on a ship to write like a puff piece about kind of an umpteenth cruise, and it sank.
Almost. It didn't actually.
It didn't really sink.
Nobody died, spoiler alert, but that's why.
But everybody almost died.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, we can sit here and laugh about it. And I think that's the premise of the book, which is that a lot of things are just left up to chance, really, right? Like, we could have tipped literally any which way. And the fine line between a complete disaster and a non-event is really, really, well, fine.
Yeah, I think you capture that feeling. I think the closest thing that I could relate to personally with it is like, you know, when you're driving someplace and then you're almost in a car accident and then you're not in a car accident. And so you have that like, that was almost like the worst day of my life, or like even, you know, something horrible happened, but I'm still like, now I'm just still listening to New Order. The same song is going on and I'm still driving down the street and we're just all gonna like go on like, we can't pause and I'll have a moment of near death. Instead, we're just going to kind of troop on through.
Yeah, precisely. And, you know, we like to assign a certain retroactive narrative, be it, you know, destiny or history, as if everything's logical. But to me, it just seems that the world is made of a whole bunch of not even choices, but chance encounters that could go any which way. And there's only one path that time goes down on, but at the end, there are all these permutations of what ifs, and that's what fascinated me about the event, and that's what I ended up writing about.
I love that that's your justification for that. What's so fascinating about it? You were on a ship that looked like it was sinking. You thought you were going to die, and you still are like, I wonder what the hook is. I wonder what my interest is. But it did feel to me. Well, I want to talk about travel writing a little bit because you were. Certainly previously, prior to this book, I was primarily a travel writer. And your book has, I think, a lot of the ambivalence that you feel about doing that for a living.
Sure.
That, sometimes it feels like a kind of bona fide journey and you're learning new things, and sometimes it feels like you're a cog in a promotion machine.
I mean, who said that freelancing or going freelancing is giving up the illusion of stability for the illusion of freedom, and going, you know, working for a corporation is the other way around, right? Or, there's that illusion. But I certainly felt very jaded after about a decade of being a freelance travel writer, and I think I came in right at the cusp where it was still kind of possible to make a living, and I still have colleagues who can from primarily freelance writing, but it's gotten a lot harder. And I describe it in The Passenger as dinosaurs. Actually, there's a photographer who was embedded on the ship to take pictures for a travel magazine. And I compare us to two dinosaurs trying to evolve into birds in this new economy of social media, where this craft that we worked so hard to master has become completely useless in favor of the instant gratification and speed of social media.
Right.
So,
and when you entered travel writing, did you have a kind of more grandiose vision of it? I mean, I know it was easier to make a living, but was it kind of philosophically something that was more interesting to you?
I mean, not quite. Again, I think I assigned some narrative retroactively to it. I accidentally stumbled into it when I was living in Germany, in Berlin. And I started just blindly pitching American publications about what was happening in Berlin. And that just became, they snowballed into a profession. And then I started thinking about, well, isn't this very noble to connect people and expose readers to different cultures and places? And I still believe that too. A lot of reviews for the book pointed out cynicism and cynical humor. I really don't think I'm that cynical. It's a protective shell, but underneath it, I actually do believe that there's a lot of value in connecting with people who are very different from you, going to places that are far away and learning from it and writing about it. And I teach travel writing too, and I genuinely get really excited when I do. It's just when I face the reality of making money from that that I get really depressed about it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a cynical book at all. But I do, but also in the defense of the cynicism that you might find in the book, I mean, obviously this centers around a cruise ship, and I mean, I think you have to be an extremely open person not to find something a little goofy and cynical about cruises.
You think so? I don't know. I think there are a lot of people who genuinely, earnestly love cruises. I have met them, and there's something infectious about that childlike enthusiasm. But at the same time, cruises are so weird. I mean, like, here's a floating complex that's big enough to house, the population of a town, just thrust into this element where humans can't survive, right?
Yeah.
Water. And let's throw some casinos and roller coasters on there. Why not?
Yeah.
Some buffets and just float around for days. Humans are kind of weird, and we come up with all these things.
It is a strange thing. I went on a cruise and had a horrible time many years ago, and what people kept saying is, like, remember, it's like basically a floating hotel. And I thought, like, right, but like no one stays in their hotel for 5 days.
Right.
Like, you go someplace to stay in a hotel so you can go out and have separate adventures. And I thought that was a weird justification.
And it's part of what I try to write about in The Passenger too, which is that, cruises are a very controlled environment. Feels safe, familiar. I understand, I see the value in it. A lot of people love to do it because they get to literally parachute down or like just drop onto a landscape, enjoy for six hours, and then come right back on board to the comfort of this very familiar environment. And I understand that. At the same time, I think, there's something kind of very literal and menacing about that representation of this floating entity that can bypass all these national borders that we've erected to keep people where they are, but only the certain kind of people or people with a certain kind of passports can bypass those boundaries. And not to mention the whole upstairs downstairs dynamic of on board, where you literally have people living deep inside the ship underneath water level, who don't really get to see any daylight, because cruises didn't really invent that kind of inequality, but it certainly is a really glaring mirror into how the world works. Fascinating and scary.
Yeah, well, I think it's COVID, of course, particularly at the beginning of COVID, put such a harsh light on cruise ships, right? Mm-hmm. That suddenly they seemed like dangerous things, and nobody knew what to do with them. I was reading actually this morning about the battle that Carnival Cruises has been having with the governor of Florida, because the governor of Florida doesn't want them to require vaccinations to go on board, which from my comfortable liberal bubble seems unthinkable to me, that you wouldn't want everyone vaccinated on a cruise ship.
And we're here because of science and vaccination. We're sitting here able to have this face-to-face chat because of that, so it's unthinkable. But
right, if it weren't for vaccines, we would never be in this weird room on the second floor in the Richmond.
Which is wonderful too. I don't know. It's
But I mean, so part of what I think is really great about The Passenger is that you capture the kind of inherent weirdness and your own scattered thoughts about cruises, even before, which seem a little catastrophic and fraught even before anything happens on the ship.
I always say that the only love that's worth writing about is the ambivalent kind, and that's my love towards travel, not necessarily cruises, but travel in general. I'm ambivalent about it. And I'd like to think that this was kind of a nuanced representation of cruises and travel.
We'll talk a little bit about that ambivalence for travel in general.
My parents might be dialing in. Hello, if they are. I got to backpack around, in my 20s quite a bit. It costs a lot of money to travel cheap, in that my parents put in the work so that I would be empowered with the kind of education and confidence to travel the world on a shoestring, right?
Right.
But I recognize that kind of privilege as I can't refute that privilege. I benefit quite a bit from that privilege.
Sure.
And certainly education has been the greatest, travel has been the greatest education of my life. But you also see that kind of inequality in mobility, right? I have an American passport that opens a lot of doors. I have the mindset where I think, sure, I'll just go there. Why not? Why can't I? That's what kind of holds me back at the same time.
Yeah, and I think there's also, you describe this in the book a little bit, but that sense that you're not getting the real experience that you're there for, right?
Mhm.
Like that's kind of the strange anxiety of travel, I think, particularly
FOMO.
if you're in kind of like if you're in just kind of a privileged bubble,
Sure.
right? That somehow you're like, I know there's like a real experience here,
Yeah.
but instead I'm having this kind of manicured, manicured.
Manicured, or you don't really transport between classes. I've noticed. I had this kind of an aha moment in my 20s when I was in a hostel in Brazil, and this drunk person was like, "This is so awesome! Like I get to travel around the world and meet all these cool people from England and New Zealand and Australia." And I was like, "Yeah, you guys are all doing the same conveyor belt, and you're hanging out with the same people." That was kind of an aha moment.
Right.
But I think we talk a lot about authenticity in travel, and that's such a buzzword. But how authentic is it to also just thrust yourself into this completely random place and think that you're getting the local experience, as if there's an essentialist, like singular, local experience. Like if someone came to San Francisco, what would be the local experience? I'm not so sure,
Yeah.
Would I take them here on Clement Street? I probably would. Actually, it's awesome.
Yeah, well, it is funny when you live here and people come here and they want something, and you have to kind of suss out, like they act like they're asking a question and giving you the answer, but really they have the answer themselves. They want some kind of experience, and once you figure out what it is, you can kind of give it to them, because there's so many different experiences you can offer them here. But in terms of like the quintessential San Franciscan, I don't think there is one.
Well, in the era of like Airbnb authenticity, like you flip through the pictures and go like, oh my God, they all look the same. Whether you check in Tulsa or whatever, there's certain kind of aesthetics that people pursue. So I don't know, when we say authenticity, what do we actually want? I'm not so sure. I also had this experience where I went to Colombia, and I stayed with a host family learning Spanish, and they were so excited to recommend all these authentic local places. And I wrote down all the addresses. I was really excited, and every single one of them was in a shopping mall. And I was so devastated. And then I realized, but this is the local experience. I don't want this local experience,
right?
But this is the authentic experience. So,
so do you think what happened on the ship? Do you think fearing for your life and being with a bunch of panicked people was like a more authentic cruise experience?
Absolutely, sure.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's certainly something to talk about, and ultimately the sinking ship in the book's title doesn't refer to the cruise ship, but more about the situation that I happened to be in before I went on the ship. I couldn't have really changed directions without having that kind of life or death moment. Like everybody else, I procrastinate, and I think I was just really delaying making up my mind. So in many ways, sure. But I don't know, I keep thinking about this person named Mary whom I met on the ship, and she was just so, and I write about her too in the book. She was so adamant about not being one of these cruise people. Like, oh no, I'm not one of them. I'm a cool mom, I do all these authentic things. I hired local guides. I don't go with the cruise ship members. And she was really, really, enthused about the helicopter rescue. I ran into her at the airport after the whole ordeal, and she was raving about it. This was awesome. I had so much fun. And then I could kind of tell, like, actually, she's shaken. She really wants the world to know that that was the authentic experience that she wanted, seeing something singular. But even she was kind of shaken by it all. So
I mean, you can't blame her.
I can't blame her, really.
I mean, I think certainly the part of the book that feels the most immediate and riveting is your direct, your kind of blow by blow of being in the ship, of slowly realizing that the situation is worse than you thought, and really wondering kind of what the next, what every moment is going to bring.
Thank you. And that's sort of the magic of writing. You can play with time, you play God, which is pretty awesome. You can slow down, you can speed things up.
Well, I'm glad that you brought that up, because I've been thinking a lot about the passage of time as we kind of move out of this pandemic moment, because it seems both that it was 5 minutes ago that the pandemic hit and all of our lives changed, and that it was like 100,000 years ago that anything happened, and that we've all been just kind of caught in this loop forever. And similarly, your book in the emergency kind of zips back and forth between, like, everything seems weighty and then just things swing by. Is that loyal to your experience of when you were there?
I think it was loyal to the experience of recollecting what happened. I think the act of writing ultimately is not something that comes naturally to us, putting together a coherent sentence and all that. It's a very human act that we've developed, but certainly I got to revise quite a bit in terms of not what happened, but how I experienced time at the time. Because if I had actually written The Passenger as if I experienced it, then it would be probably like 2 pages of really scary, gripping, stories, and then long stretches of contemplation and nothingness. But when you're writing, you get to actually play around with it, and I love it.
How much did you feel when it was going on that did you have this urge that you were gathering information? Did you feel like you were going to write something?
It's how I deal with the world. I mean, I take notes compulsively, in part because that's my coping mechanism.
Sure.
But I didn't know what I was going to make out of the notes, and I certainly didn't think that I was going to write a book about it, to be honest. My editor, Josh at Godin, actually is the one who convinced me, because I thought this was just a short article that I could write and kind of laugh about.
Right.
But I don't know, as I was digging around, I read hundreds of news articles about the incident and try to piece together what happened from different vantage points. And it also really clicked when I interviewed rescue workers and people who were seeing it from a different perspective.
Right.
I got to see this kind of 3D model, and funnily enough, that's when I got to play with time some more too. I think you freeze frame and then zoom in, zoom out.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it seems that any writer, but particularly a freelance writer who is used to kind of scanning the horizon and figuring out, like, oh, how can I pitch this? I just loved the idea that, like, there's no way you would be able to turn that off. Like, even as you're in a dining room filling with water.
Yeah. And then
that you'd be like, oh my God, I gotta get out of here and pitch this.
Right. And that ambivalence towards the tray too, where I would compulsively think about the angle and then feel really filthy about it. Just, felt really horrible that I was thinking about story ideas. And then I was like, but actually, can I do a listicle?
And then there's a lot, I mean, I don't know, there's not so much I want to give away in the book, but I mean, you spend quite a bit of time on your own kind of romantic and personal epiphanies that accompanied this incident.
Yeah.
And was that more difficult to write about?
Yeah, absolutely. It was just so gut-wrenching to write about, obviously. So the relationship part, actually, until the very last minute when we went to press, were all just actually placeholders where I would describe what I think should go in there, but I just couldn't bear to write those parts until I changed my partner's name and and treat, the whole thing as if it's an exercise in characterization and plot, because it was just so painful, too close to home. And also, I feel extremely ambivalent about talking about my family history too. I come from very private stock, and we don't really like to draw attention to ourselves. And full disclosure, I used to make fun of memoirs all the time, so it's hilarious that I'm debuting with a memoir,
Right.
but serves me right. But I do feel very, very ambivalent that I talk about these really painful personal things as well as some shared family stories that don't necessarily just belong to me. I mean, they belong to me, but also I share them with other people
Right.
who are really dear to me. But at the same time, the book just wasn't going to be a book without those elements, because until I made myself really vulnerable, it was just kind of a WTF story about an accident that never was.
Right.
Yeah.
And were you hesitant about taking on some of those shared stories that you're talking about as your own? Is that?
I mean, I acknowledge that there's, not just, they don't just belong to me.
Right.
And in some ways it helped actually to interview the rescue workers, because those are decidedly not my stories.
Right.
So by doing that, I felt kind of empowered to, hey, if I can write about this person that I've only spoken to on the phone, who happens to be a helicopter captain from Denmark, then hey, like, here's some stories I can share that I've heard all through my life, and I think there's also a part of me that wanted to leave that kind of legacy of family lore that I wanted to pass down somehow.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to say there's so much kind of talk and concern about appropriation in literature now, but I think you're the first writer I've ever heard who was like worried about appropriating actually their own family story.
I'm very scared, yes, and but it's shared heritage, and this is my take on it. And if they disagree with what I wrote, then I hope they'll write their own version. And in the passenger, I write about this too. My heart just really swelled in that at the end of the ordeal, and I looked around and looked at all those passengers and thought, wow, this is such an overwhelming feeling that every one of us will walk away from here with a different story to tell.
Yeah.
Some of them will kind of overlap, many of them will not. And what a incredible feeling to know that you can share something, an experience, yet have very different narratives about that.
Yeah. I mean, you hear about real communities that are built out of emergencies like that. Do you think that you'll keep in touch with these people? Do you think that will be
not quite for me, because I felt like I really relished in that outsider status as this guest, but not really a guest, not a paying guest,
right.
Working there but not part of the staff. And I thrived on that, and I didn't quite connect with other people as much. The photographer that I met there, I feel like there's this kind of cosmic connection for a brief second. So there's a scene in the book where I become actually one of the first people that he confides in, that his then girlfriend was pregnant, because he just found out and hadn't had any chance to share that. And I felt so privileged to be that person out of 7.whatever billion people.
Right.
But it's not like we talk every week to talk about his son,
Right.
Sometimes lives converge and go separate ways, and there's a lot of beauty in that too. So for that one night, I really felt close to him, and
yeah. I mean, it's a friend of mine always describes his favorite writing as having a consistent rate of surprise, and I would say that the Passenger has this consistent rate of surprise because so many tempting narratives that come out of something like this, oh, I'll be completely changed, nothing really matters, but these most kind of pressing emergencies, all these I just think like very alluring mythology that we place on experience. You kind of avoid them one by one. You show yourself leaning toward them, and then you lean away, and it becomes a really genuine experience. It's really a beautiful book.
Oh, thank you.
And I think you're going to read some out loud.
Sure, I'm gonna read the section that Daniel said he enjoyed. So it's from.
Well, I enjoyed all the sections.
Oh, thank you.
But you can't read the whole book out loud.
True.
I'm going to vanish from the camera. That's my plan.
So I don't want to give any spoilers, so I'm gonna read from toward the beginning of the book. So, and this is my publication date. I have never read this aloud in public. This part. First time I'm holding this book and reading it aloud, so you guys are the first people to hear this. So excuse any mistakes I make. Before panic united us, boredom did. We've been sailing up and down the coast of Norway for more than a week, alternating between placid fjords and the open sea. Each day, the ship dropped anchor at a new port and unleashed all 915 passengers onto snow-packed streets and into shops brimming with hand-knit sweaters. We rode in sleighs pulled by steaming reindeers, squinted our eyes at 7,000-year-old rock carvings, and bathed in sunlight filtered through the stained glass of a titanium cathedral. And we witnessed the Northern Lights, the reason many of us came on this cruise. Once accustomed to the dopamine hit that a new locale brings each day, your brain begins to take the novelty for granted. You develop a sudden aversion to the mundane. I did anyway. Yesterday, the captain blamed high winds and rough waves for the cancellation of a scheduled port call at Buda, just above the Arctic Circle. Today was yet another stormy day without docking, which meant we were left to amuse ourselves on this floating 465 cabin complex. We were bored to death. Skip a little bit. Desperate for stimulation, I turned up for the morning quiz hour at the Explorer's Lounge, the ship's glass-ensconced living room at the bow on deck 11. I sank into a chaise with a slice of success cake, which Google told me is a Norwegian specialty of almond meringue and egg cream. Teaming up with a group of snow-haired passengers who are 3, maybe 4 decades older, I try to answer questions about minor Henry VIII wives and milestone World War battles. Since Viking Ocean Cruises advertises heavily on PBS, it attracts a certain demographic, the type of people who actually want to geek out on Baroque palaces and the Marshall Plan in their free time. Without Google, I was an empty vessel. Needless to say, I got my ass handed to me. So much for that success cake. Earlier that morning, the dark sea and bruise-colored clouds had sandwiched a sliver of blue sky. By the time the quiz finished, the blue ribbon had disappeared and near horizontal rain lashed at us. The ship pitched violently, rising and bouncing as we penetrated deeper into the storm. Still, from all the way up here on deck 11, hundreds of feet above the sea, even the largest waves seemed like ripples in a bathtub. Wait till my grandkids see this, said one of my quiz teammates, thrusting her phone at me to film her against the window. We were about to enter Hustadvika, the 11-mile stretch of coastline, shorter than the length of Manhattan, between the towns of Kristiansand and Molde. Intricate fjords burst into a confetti of rocks here, but unlike other parts of the Norwegian coast, there are no islands to slow down the waves. The untamed North Atlantic douses the shallow reefs hard and makes this well-traveled shipping channel tricky to navigate. Shipwrecks lie underwater, such as that of a 300-year-old Dutch merchant vessel once loaded with yellow bricks. Then I geek out a little bit, I'm gonna skip that part. By noon, the heavy planters began sliding around the Explorer's Lounge like Ouija pieces. A ceiling panel dropped on a passenger. The art of building a cruise ship involves furnishing it with objects meant to remain immovable in the roughest seas. Now, pieces that were once bolted down were gliding about like ghosts. The ship was all funhouse corridors, shifting and turning. Workers fought to tame the chlorinated geyser that had once been the indoor pool. As I half crawled toward my cabin, the ship rolled so hard that I had to lie flat against the hallway wall as it threatened to become the hallway floor. A young Chinese waitress, usually chirpy as she poured morning coffee, dropped her tray to grip the railing, wide eyes staring at nothing. "Have you seen anything like this?" I asked. She shook her head and clenched her jaw. What was her story? The only child of a middle-class couple who could afford English lessons, Setting out after college from her obscure Chinese city of 10 million, determined to see the world on an adventure of a lifetime? Of course, I had no idea. And what did she see in me? A suspicious man. Most solo male travelers over 25 can seem shady, who's been turning up at each meal by himself, rarely talking with fellow passengers who are twice his age. Maybe a divorcee, maybe a son accompanying elderly parents, maybe just a lonely cruise geek. Well, here we were, both of us at once familiar and unknown, sharing something neither of us had signed up for. As the ship righted itself, we nodded and slid past each other. Stepping into the shaken snow globe of a dining room, I dodged the salmon fillets and buttery buns flying around. Busboys hugged dirty plates and champagne flutes, trying not to face plant between the outraged passengers gripping their banquets. Every few minutes, another wave flipped more beverage carts. I stepped around the debris and asked the woman manning the ice cream stand for 2 scoops, chocolate and stracciatella, please. Thanks. She looked at me, incredulous and probably a little disgusted. She still obliged. During the past month I'd spent aboard all-inclusive cruises, I turned into a bottomless pit, trying to fill a growing hollowness by raiding late-night poolside buffets and terrorizing night shift staff with my jet-lagged room service orders. So frequent and erratic were my requests that once a kind night shift cook wrote out, "Feel better soon, Chaney," in chocolate syrup on a plate of fruit I had ordered with chicken soup at midnight. No, I didn't feel better. The beast, seasick or not, had to be fed. There's a travel industry adage that cruises are for the overfed, the newlyweds, and the nearly dead. I certainly fit into the first category now. It seemed I was about to qualify for the last.
I love the image of you ordering ice cream anyway.
True story.
I believe it. And did you ever track down that waitress?
No. In my futile attempts, I try to befriend crew members on social media, and I follow them still. They may not follow me back.
Right.
And I find it so poignant to see their lives going different ways and all that. I did try to track down one waiter who left a really big impression on me, and I got shut down really fast because the person that I did end up talking to, a cook, said, there are like over 1 billion people in India. What do you mean, do I know this waiter? Of course I don't know him just because he's Indian and I'm Indian.
Right.
It's hard.
Yeah.
And what's also fascinating is that the crew members who ever talked about the incident on social media, most of them just completely erased them all from their accounts as if that never happened. I don't know. But you can't erase a story,
No.
I'm not crazy. I was there.
You're not crazy. I mean, not for reasons of that. I can't verify your entire mental health. And so how are you feeling on publication day? Like this is I think such an elegant book of ambivalence, but I'm curious if the publication of the book to you feels like a bona fide accomplishment, or are you as kind of anxious and blurry around the edges about it as you are about everything else?
I'm a little freaked out that I'm not freaked out. I really thought that today was going to be nerve-wracking and that was going to be a mess, but actually I feel totally calm. And I think it's because last month I came to realize that The Passenger doesn't belong to me. It's a book. I happen to have written it, but the moment you hand it off to your editor, it doesn't belong to you anymore. It's an object that's going to have its own life, and I hope it does. And my job is to make sure that it thrives and does its thing. But no, I think I'm able to separate my ego from it, and which is why I'm just completely chill right now. I don't know. I'm still
well, that's good.
Yeah, in disbelief, actually.
Well, I'm really happy to see this book go out into the world, particularly at this moment, because in the moment that I read it, you gave it to me in galleys because we knew each other a little bit through the library program. It was like a great book to read during the pandemic. because it was like, you can't travel. And it was like, oh my God, thank God you can't travel. Look how awful travel is, and look what can happen to you. And like every step is a new disaster that even affects your own kind of domestic happiness and everything else. So I just was like, oh, I love this book. This is like perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, I passed that galley you gave me to my family, who are obviously all buying hardback copies today, as they should.
From Green Apple.
From Green Apple.
But well, will it withstand the test of time after the pandemic, as people can travel? I hope so, because I also think that this is kind of a chronicle of a very specific time we lived and experienced. When we were locked down indoors, I thought I've done this on a cruise ship, like we were just drifting, we had no idea what was happening, we were locked inside. I can tell you about this. It provided some guidance, not all. And part of the passengers, the part of the passengers does take place in San Francisco during the pandemic, very tail end of the book. So I really hope that it does that experience justice. We'll see what I think in a year.
I mean, I think I've never read a book like it, and I think that particularly in the kind of the realm of cruise ships and the way that they exist in the imagination, there's so much kind of goofy fiction about them. David Foster Wallace has a pretty famous essay about it that really kind of takes it down from a cynical philosophical sense.
Right.
But I mean, this is a book that has at its heart how little we know. And I think that those are all my favorite books. And so I'm happy to be here talking about it. And I'm excited because usually when I do a bookstore event with another writer, I bring my cocktail kit, given to me by Sydney Goldstein, may she rest in peace. And I make a cocktail for the book in question.
I'm so honored.
And I, haven't got to do it for a while, so this is really exciting.
It's your first time since the pandemic began?
Yeah, I haven't had an alcoholic beverage. No, just kidding. I've done little else, but I haven't got to make a cocktail for anyone's event because, we've all been locked up.
Yeah.
And that somehow making a cocktail via proxy. I did an event with Arisa White a couple weeks ago, and I was at a bar, and the bar had sent her a cocktail, so that was pretty good.
That's pretty good.
That was the closest we could get, but I didn't get to make it. The bar got to make it. Yeah. I know. Arisa White only wishes she could be in this stage. So
I hope I didn't drive everybody away with my reading, but if you're still there, ask Carson questions. I'd be happy to take questions, comments.
Car's gonna hold up the questions while I'm at the cocktail. I'm just gonna explain the ingredients first, which is I got a whiskey that has like a very high hot feel to it, which is what you want when you're like sinking slowly into the icy water. And then the only Scandinavian ingredient that that seems like it would go at all with whiskey is this Cronin, which is a Swedish punch. So it's a little bit like a Manhattan, but it's made of like the whiskey that the St. Bernard gives you when perhaps you've fallen into the icy Scandinavian waters, and the punch that is used celebrationally in Sweden all the time.
There you go.
So we have, thank God I'm alive, and hooray, my book came out in one cocktail.
Celebrating in the form of hypothermia.
Exactly. Hypothermia and literary despair are, they're pretty close to each other. I've suffered from both.
Oh.
So, yeah. Are there questions from the audience?
There definitely are. My question is, does this cocktail have a name?
Does the cocktail have a name? Of course it is. It's called The Passenger is the name of this cocktail.
Of course.
You make it very easily at home. All you need is a strong whiskey and an obscure Swedish punch, which I'm sure everyone in the audience already has in a cupboard somewhere.
If you can't make it yourself, store-bought is fine. We do have several questions from the audience. So we have here from Julia. Prior to the cruise ship, what was your most exciting trip or encounter as a travel writer?
Oh my. Gosh, exciting. Define that. Now you've stumped me. I have a terrible memory, by the way, so I'll regret this. Do you have one actually while I'm just thinking?
Like a travel experience?
Most exciting travel experience.
Yeah, I I had a really inspirational trip to a strange place in Italy that I'm beginning to write about. And but one of the things of getting to write about it is that I can't tell anyone what it is. It's going to be in a novel, so I can't get into specifics. But I went to this magic place, and it's a private place. It's like a little hard to get to visit, but I worked my magic and got to visit it. And it's owned by this older man who you don't get to see, who's like quite old. And as we were wandering around this magical place, I thought, is this guy, does he really still live here? You know, or is it just technically owned by him? And so I asked the woman who was showing me around, does he really live here? And she said, he's within earshot. And that gave me a whole idea for a book right there. As soon as she said, he's within earshot, I thought, oh, I have a whole book idea now.
Wow.
So that was like the last, that was, I don't know if it was the most, but it was the most recent magical travel
the title
experience.
right there.
Yeah, it's a pretty good title.
I think so. Well, the most recent trip I made before the pandemic was to Mexico, and that was great. Because I was serenaded by the regional manager, DHL manager of half of Yucatan under the starlight with mariachi band. But I don't think that's the kind of exciting that Julia was asking for.
That sounds exciting to me.
It was something.
The mariachi music always makes me a little weepy.
Yeah, me too. And he also promised me a 50% discount on all things I could ship to the US, you know, DHL. So right. I was very touched. I read about this experience in my book, which is that I got to take my mom to New Zealand to write about honey, Manuka honey, after mastectomy. And I think a lot about that trip because it was really meaningful to me. So, and you know, obviously mother-son trips, like we bickered like crazy, but still.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I've never taken a real mother-son trip.
I recommend it, but
maybe I should go with your mother. We'll work it out later. We don't have to work it out right here.
This is delicious, by the way.
Thank you. It is, isn't it? We already cheered, but we'll cheer again. Hooray. What's the next question?
So I will say too that we have many folks, and thank you for being so attentive and for asking such good questions. We will get to as many of them as we can, but we cannot get to all of them. Let's see. Gigi asked, did you share the part about your family with your parents before publication?
I ran the idea by them. My mom has seen the New Zealand part, the part about Japan. So my family's history, so background, I'm Korean. My family has, like many other people in Korea, you know, during the 30-some years of colonialism, which was quite brutal. There are some stories about that as well. I put that into the passenger, and my father knows what part of it I put it in there, but I did not show him the exact section. I do question, I guess in general, I ambivalence.
Yeah.
I do question, you know, veracity of certain elements of that story that was passed down to me, and I would love to hear what he thinks. Yeah, but I have not.
Yeah, I think that's something we have in common, actually, is that both of our families have gone through national trauma, for lack of a better word, or political trauma, and that it's like a peculiar kind of painful, I think, to begin to distrust the veracity of it.
Yeah,
right,
exactly.
because it's not a good feeling.
There are certain details that seem to contradict, and I'm super fascinated by them. In particular, there was a ship disaster of its own, and it's unclear how far it went. Literally, how far they drifted. My father as a child. Very curious about how people recollect things and how they might or might not contradict each other.
Yeah.
I will also add that my father is a much better writer than I'll ever be, but he has also said that he would never publish a book because he couldn't stand the idea of someone, you know, disapproving or not liking the writing. And clearly I got over that because there's a good chance that he may not like that section, but I did dedicate the book to my parents for a good reason.
Yeah, it's a smart move. I noticed that.
This is from Carl. Thank you, Daniel, and congrats, Chaney. Curious if or how nationalism reared its head during the ordeal, or was there hopefully even an international spirit, some kind of egalitarianism amongst passengers, crew, and the rescuers?
You know, people are so civilized, and I mentioned that in the section that I read, which is that PBS watchers are very civilized people. We did not trample one another. We could sit through pledge drives. So hey, we're good. What did weird me out was the higher global hierarchy of staff mostly from developing countries stayed up all night serving us passengers, and passengers from developed countries were being served. And even during that ordeal, the kitchen was sending out food, and that really kind of creeped me out. I mean, I'm glad that there wasn't utter chaos, but at the same time, gosh, what will it take to actually make the world a little more equal? I don't know. It's not, it wasn't a disaster. So.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem to be a global pandemic either.
No.
Yeah.
Let's see. What gave you, this is from Maddie, what gave you the idea to interview members of the crew and the rescue team?
I just really wanted a rounded vantage point. And I was surrounded by other passengers. I was, pretty much a passenger. So I really wanted to see what it was like to see from their point of view. None of the crew members that I approached was really willing to speak on record. Some could talk to me, but said, you know what, I want to go back to working for them. Like you can't quote me, you can't say anything. But some of the rescue workers were very willing to talk to me, and I'm very grateful for that, because that reminded me how precarious the whole situation was, much more than I thought. And I read news articles about how we were about 100 yards away from the shore at some point, almost capsizing. One professor thought that we were about less than 2 feet from grazing the sea bottom. I mean, pretty crazy stuff. But when you're inside this very manicured capsule bubble, you don't really realize that. And you talk to a seasoned veteran of the Danish Air Force who says, I've never seen anything like that before. You kind of appreciate, wow, that's how close we were. And also realize they still risked their lives to save us, to make sure we were okay. So it gives you a whole new level of appreciation. That was very important to me.
We'll take a couple more questions here. Hillary would like to know, when they helicoptered you off the ship, did you get to take your luggage?
Have you seen this viral video of people evacuating from airplanes, and then they open the luggage compartment and try to carry their stuff?
Yeah.
No, I was not helicoptered off. It was randomly, people were randomly selected, like in some dystopian sci-fi film. I was not one of the chosen ones, so I didn't have that dilemma.
Megan would like to know, what is something that surprised you about the way that readers have reacted to or interpreted the book thus far?
I haven't.
When the book is 12 hours old.
Right. So I haven't had a whole lot of people who reached out to me about what surprised them or with their reactions, other than the people that I actively solicited their opinions from, like Daniel. I have been really pleasantly surprised by how people were attracted to different elements of the book, or different sentences even. I thought that was great, and to a sentence that I thought might have been kind of a throwaway. So again, this doesn't belong to me anymore. It's got its own life, and people are going to make what they will out of it. So you go through that a lot, right, with your books? Or do you?
I use the precise self-hypnosis that you're dismissing now. You have to, in the way that you consume literature, your literature will be consumed, right? And so there's some books that you love, there's some books that you pay a lot of attention to, there's some books that really haunt you, there's some books that just kind of go in one ear and out the other. There's some books that have a really wonderful kind of entertaining period in your life and then it's totally over. Some of them you appreciate later, and so there's all that going on, and you have to let go of it best you can, which is why I often have a cocktail kit handy.
What I do hope for the passengers is that it does leave a long wake rather than a splash. And if there are some people out there who find this in a couple of years who may find some solace in it because they're going through a certain difficult time or what have you, then I would be more than ecstatic about it. So
2 more questions. One, will you ever go on a cruise again?
no. Next. Yes. Next.
I didn't think
Nor
so.
will I. I'll say this is a result mostly of reading The Passenger.
Sorry.
Also, I had a terrible time on the cruise I went on.
And then we actually had a couple of people ask this question, and I happen to know the answer to it because I read your bio on your website. Who would play you in the TV or movie version of The Passenger?
Wow.
Wow. Well, Steven Yeun's super ambulance, undeniable.
Yeah.
Nicole Kidman running around a darkened
I hear
house.
she's dying for the part. That's what I hear about Nicole Kidman.
Are you listening, Nicole?
Yeah, of course she
Play me.
is. Yeah. We don't know what phony name you're using on Zoom today, but we know you're watching. We know you're taking notes. We know you'll stop at nothing to get this part. Sad, really.
I mean, tragic.
Yeah.
So sad.
The audio cut out for just a moment during the first part of your answer, if you
Oh.
wouldn't mind. We heard Nicole Kidman, but it was the first part of your answer.
I said Steven Yeun is hot in every sense of the word. So, but Jessica Chastain would be my choice just because of the physical resemblance.
Yeah, it's eerie.
I know.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Wonderful. I'm super appreciative of everyone tuning in.
This was a delight. I have to say that I don't have a lot of strongly held moral beliefs, but one of them is that if you enter the space of an independent bookstore and you leave without buying a book, that you're committing a sin. And in joining this event, you have entered an independent bookstore. And so I think you should buy at least 4 or 5 copies of The Passenger. But if you, for some reason, have already purchased them, but you're attending this
4 or
event,
5 copies.
you have to buy something from Green Apple Books. We're so grateful for them for hosting this event and for letting us be in a strange room together, broadcasting to you as the world starts to get better and as this book launches into the world.
Well, thank you so much for joining. And again, thank you, Green Apple. Please buy a book. It doesn't have to be mine. It could be Daniel's. You have a book coming out in August.
I do, but you know, there's a lot of books you can buy.
Yes.
There are a lot of good books here at Green Apple. I already have one over there. I'm not going to say what it is.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well,
Card, did you take a screenshot of the people by any chance? Or I don't know if anyone's still around, to be honest. I don't see anybody.
Oh, Chaney, everyone is here who was here from the beginning. They're all here. All 75 of
see
them.
them.
Yeah.
Can I see them somehow?
yeah, put that there.
I can't show you their faces, but I can figure out, I can send you a list of who is here.
Okay, good.
Oh, no, yeah, I just want you to like,
Ooh,
yeah.
we can see.
Oh, participants, hang on, don't go away yet. I
Don't
just
go
wanna
away,
say
wants to
hi.
see.
Gallery.
Oh, Vanessa. Hi, Vanessa.
Hello, everybody. I can't see them, yeah, but I would love to see your beautiful faces. I did tell my friend Uju on the East Coast that she might be seen at the very end, so she did her eyebrows. I am so sorry, Uju.
Oh.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
But
You can post your eyebrows somewhere on social media and we'll all go and look at them.
thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I'll give you the last word, but thank you very much for joining us tonight, everyone out there, and also to you, Chaney and Daniel.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. That wasn't awkward at all.
No.